Now, we're at the point of the draft where we have the New York Jets on the clock at number 18. The good part about doing this mock draft when we're doing it, we don't have to worry about Jets fans booing our picks where we are now. So without Jets fans, you have the 18th overall selection with the New York Jets. Where are you going with this pick?
And, I actually do hear a few Jets fans in the background. That's how strong their boos are sometimes. But I think they're going to be pleased with my pick here. I'm looking across the offense and defense. I think we did a lot on the offense side of the ball by picking up Michael Vick, Chris Johnson, and Eric Decker. A position we have not taken care of is rush in, the true rush 3-4 defense, outside linebacker. And that would be Anthony Barr out of UCLA. You get a guy who can put his hand on the ground, come around, can actually flow back, cover. He's a versatile athlete who will be impactful for a defense that is a former top 10 defense and turn it back into a top 10 defense again.
Now, why do you think someone like Barr, who was an elite player going into the season, has that perceived draft stock fall?
So one of the things is he didn't produce the numbers that people expected. When you have certain numbers one year, you expect them to get a little bit better. Clowney actually suffered from this as well. The thing about Barr is you didn't see him regress, and that's a good thing from some of these players. If the numbers aren't there, you want to see why. Sometimes it's from double teams, it's from other things. He was actually focused on by a lot of offensive teams as the focal point, and that caused his numbers not to look as good as the prior year.
All right, Gene, you back on the clock with the 19th overall pick, the Miami Dolphins. Where do they go, offense or defense, with this pick?
Well, I think that they've had a couple of departures on the defensive side that may think people may think they need to lean to the defensive side of the ball. I believe that you can't go anywhere with this pick but to the offensive line. Obviously, we know the debacle that was the Miami Dolphins offensive line last year. Obviously, with the controversy between Martin and Incognito, those two guys didn't play as well before that controversy came out. The offensive line didn't play as well after that controversy. Ultimately, they blew it up, and now there's one bona fide offensive lineman on their team right now, as I see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them an offensive lineman that can fulfill multiple needs. I call him the offensive line Swiss Army knife. I'm going to take Zack Martin, offensive tackle, out of Notre Dame.
That's a good pick because they can actually slot him down inside if need be. And like you said, he's a Swiss Army knife. He can do multiple things along that offensive line, and they need a lot of help up front. That puts me on the clock at number 20 with Arizona. And the Cardinals need a quarterback. I can go in the secondary, but when you look at their outside linebackers, I think they have to get younger and a lot more athletic. I know they picked up Alex Okafor in 2013, Sam Ochoa in 2011. But I think they can go one more guy that can get pressure on the QB, and that's Dee Ford out of Auburn. I don't care how big he is. I don't care what he ran the 40. All he did at Auburn was live in the backfield, get sacks. Saw him at the Senior Bowl. He constantly beat the tackle on both sides. That's the type of player that you want playing in your defense, your 3-4 defense, where you have to constantly get pressure on the QB. So I'm going with Dee Ford out of Auburn. That puts you, Chris, on the clock at number 21, the Green Bay Packers. Where do you think they have to go with this pick, offense or defense?
So I'm going to go with CJ Mosley with this pick. And the main reason is I look at my offense, and yes, we do need depth at receiver. We've lost a lot over the last couple of years. But on the defensive side, we've lost a lot of the leadership guys. With Charles Woodson leading, guys like that, I need CJ Mosley to come in and resurrect this defense and make it as good as it has been in the past. A.J. Hawk played solid football last year, but that's still not good enough. It's not getting the job done. Now that he can be a secondary option with CJ Mosley being the true middle linebacker, this defense will be back on top of the NFL again.
Yeah, A.J. Hawk was a top 5 pick. That's just, amazing to me.
It actually very much is amazing to me as well.
That was a great pick by Chris. I mean, you can't argue with C.J. Mosley fitting on the inside in that Packers defense. That puts Eugene on the clock at number 22, the Philadelphia Eagles. They can go offense, defense, secondary, offensive line, defensive line. What do you think they go with this pick?
Well, a lot of needs in Philadelphia. I think Chip Kelly is putting his stamp on this Eagles team. They were able to make the playoffs last year in his first year. People are still, though, scratching their head about that Deshaun Jackson move. How do we then replace him? So because of that, I think we need to go wide receiver in the first round. You want a guy who can fit in because right now Riley Cooper is the only healthy receiver that was of significance coming back. He's probably a number 3. You have Jeremy Maclin, who is a great number 2, but he's coming off of an injury. And so you're going to need to bolster a guy who can also stretch the field like Deshaun Jackson did. For that reason, I think they go with Oregon State wide receiver Brandon Cooks.
And why Brandon Cooks to fit in that offense over a guy, let's say, like Marqise Lee?
Well, I love Marqise Lee, and obviously he has a vast knowledge of both wide receivers. I just think that when you're talking about the prolific nature of a Brandon Cooks, he caught so many balls. He always seemed to catch the ball, whereas Marqise Lee, this year, one could question how good was his focus. Was he already looking to greener pastures? How focused was he on making himself the best wide receiver he could possibly be? I think that those are things. Well, and Marqise Lee has a little bit more personality, and we just saw him get rid of a wide receiver that had a lot of personality from out of Southern California as well. So with that, I think that he will go with a wide receiver who has a chip on his shoulder, a wide receiver who feels like he's been undersold his entire life, but has the goods. And Brandon Cooks, I believe, will be a great fit for what Chip Kelly wants out of a wide receiver's personality and what he wants out of his play.
Now, you just made a great case for Brandon Cooks. And me sitting here at 23 with the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm running up to the podium because I'm going to just cut to the chase and take Marqise Lee out of USC. I love his game, good all-around game. We talk about this all the time. He looked like he played a lot. You can tell he played a lot of football growing up. He mastered the little nuances of the position. He's a game breaker. May not be a burner, but definitely has game-breaking ability, and I think he can help the Chiefs' offense out. He has that swagger. He can help out in the return game. He return punch, which says a lot about his footwork and his ability to make people miss in the phone booth. I'm going with Marqise Lee, an easy pick out of USC going to Kansas City. Thank you for taking Cooks earlier so I can go with Marqise Lee out of for Kansas City.
You're welcome.
At pick 24, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a very good football team. Another one of these teams that is ready to make a deep run in the playoffs if they can get past the first round. Where do you think they go with this 24th overall pick?
Now, I'm looking at Cincinnati, and this is actually one of the most talented and deep rosters in the entire NFL. They lost some guys via attrition, free agency. I look at the back end as an issue as a whole. I love George Iloka as their starting strong safety. Their corners, some have been injured, like Leon Hall. Some, I think, are better suited to play different schemes, like Draker Patrick. Some have just kind of aged out, like Terrence Newman. I go with a guy who can replace a lot of different positions in Lamarcus Joyner out of Florida State. This guy's played corner very well. He's played free safety very well for Florida State. And he has something in common with Tyrann Mathieu. They are always around the ball as a defensive player. You cannot fight that.
Well, I love Lamarcus Joyner. I gave him a first-round grade. Again, you can't go wrong with a defensive player that always has the ball in his hands. Why do you think some people are soured or have soured on Lamarcus Joyner as opposed to his teammate, Terrence Brooks?
And I look at something that really is concerning to me. It's a size issue. That is the biggest knock that I've heard against Lamarcus Joyner. It's not his lack of ability to actually cover. It's not his lack of ability to track the ball. It's the fact that he's not the prototype size. I don't care about that. Personally, I want a guy who's going to be an impactful player at every level.
And that would instantly upgrade that secondary, getting that guy, like you said, that can do multiple things very well in Lamarcus Joyner out of Florida State. Chris, with a defensive back coming off the board for Cincinnati and Lamarcus Joyner out of Florida State. Gene, you're up now. You have San Diego, a very good football team, made the playoffs last year, actually knocked off Cincinnati. Where did he go with the selection?
Well, San Diego has a luxury here. I don't see any glaring needs. Obviously, everyone always has an opportunity to bolster their offense, bolster their defense. But I look at one of their primary positions, the tight end position. And right now they have a guy who's getting a lot older, a lot longer in the tooth, maybe looking for his heir apparent. And obviously they've been employing a couple of tight end sets. But when one goes down, it kind of leaves them vulnerable as to what they were doing. And I don't know exactly the ceiling of their number 2 wide receiver right now. So with that pick, I believe the San Diego Chargers take a risk, but with a high reward on the other end, and go with Eric Ebron, tight end out of University of North Carolina.
That's a surprising pick because let's see, you have Gates, you have Ladarius Green, whom they drafted from the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, home to Rage Cages, and now you have Eric Ebron. Why Ebron fits here for you?
Well, let's just be honest about it. They have two wide receivers that are in tight end bodies. They have two guys right now who don't bring a lot to the table in the blocking game. And I think that with Gates' age and his propensity for getting hurt, you have to have a guy in the mix that can one day not only replace him, but maybe even take it to the next level. Gates was never the athlete that Ebron was. He was always a good athlete. He knew how to use his body very well. There's no doubt about it. For all the question marks about Ebron is a phenomenal athletic talent. And if they can harness that athletic ability and get him to buy into more of the traditional tight end things, I believe they can have a seamless transition from one future Hall of Fame tight end to possibly another.
Hey, you make a great case. You shook up the draft with that one. At 26, Cleveland Browns are back on the clock with their second overall selection. They went Bridgewater earlier in the draft, and I think I'm going to shake up the draft right here with one of my favorite prospects. He's actually my number 2 overall player in this draft class, and that, my friend, is Gabe Jackson out of Mississippi State, the offensive guard. Just love the way he dominates at the line of scrimmage on both ends of offense, in the passing game as well as in the running game. You protect yourself inside out, and I think guard play is important, and they have to get better on the inside in both aspects of their offense. They got to run better, and they also have to protect on the inside. Gabe Jackson can give them both with one pick. I'm a big fan of guard play, and especially Gabe Jackson and what he was able to do in the SEC. I like Gabe Jackson at number 26 for the Cleveland Browns. And Chris, that puts the New Orleans Saints on the clock. They have great offense, great defense last year. Where can they fill some needs with this pick?
I'm going to go with Jason Verrett out of TCU. Listen, I'm looking at Rob Ryan's defense. It's called a traditional 3-4 defense, but it's not really. It has some elements of 3-3-5 to it, 4-2-5. They're going to use those safeties with Jerry's Bird, Kenny Vaccaro, and even newly signed Champ Bailey in a rotation. One thing that they lack is corner depth. Still have Keenan Lewis, lost Jabari Greer. Now you bring in Jason Verrett, a very handsy guy. And in certain systems, much like you see in Seattle, you need a handsy guy who's going to be able to ride a receiver down the field and allow their defense to do what it's supposed to do. And Verrett does that extremely well.
And despite being 5'9", 185, here's a guy that is always in your grill. You think he has the skill set to play above the rim with these bigger wide receivers?
Absolutely. There's a guy that comes to mind that Verrett reminds me of because he's also a good tackler and the way that he defends bigger receivers, and that's Antoine Winfield out of Ohio State. You can't come down with the ball if I'm legitimately in your space, and that's what Winfield did, and that's what Jason Verrett also does.
Chris went defensive pick right here, and we know Ron Rivera is a defensive guy. You're on the clock at 28, Gene, with Carolina. Do they go back to the defense side of the football like they did last year in the first 2 rounds?
Well, if it wasn't for the moves that they made this offseason, I would say yes, they would just continue to stockpile and bolster that defense. But with the departure of pretty much every viable receiving option that wasn't in the backfield that possibly could have been relied upon, now gone from the Carolina Panthers, I think it's imperative that they go wide receiver in this draft and possibly with a couple of picks in this draft. And so at this position, I think they really need to find someone that's going to give them a little more size, but give them the speed that they're losing with a guy like Steve Smith. I'm going to go Jordan Matthews out of Vanderbilt.
And why Matthews over guys, let's say, like Jarvis Landry or let's say Devontae Adams? Why Jordan Matthews here?
I think that Jordan Matthews, gives you a little bit more of that separation speed that Landry doesn't possess. I think Landry's a guy who is going to ultimately be a possession guy in the NFL, a great possession guy, a dominating possession guy. But I think that you need to give Cam Newton a guy that he can use his ridiculously strong arm to throw the ball 65, 70 yards down the field and have a guy that he doesn't have to worry about overthrowing. I think Jordan Matthews has that. And as a small little caveat, not that I get too much into bloodlines, but it can't be ignored, he is in a family tie of one Jerry Rice. Not calling him Jerry Rice, don't think he'll ever be Jerry Rice, but when you have some Jerry Rice type of blood in you, I get a little bit more on the nostalgic side for our great wide receivers that we had in the 80s and on through to the 90s.
That's a good point. You made a good case for Matthews, and I'm about to make a great case for New England here at 29. And they are a tough team to draft for because you can go anywhere with this pick. They need help at receiver. You look in the secondary, they can go strong safety, possibly, but they went there last year. I'm actually going to the offensive side. I got to help out Tom Brady and get him some receiving weapons. I'm actually going to get him the best tight end, by definition of what a tight end is, in the draft, a guy that can block and also run routes and is very athletic for a big man, Austin Seferian-Jenkins out of Washington. I think he is the quintessential tight end prospect that you look for in the draft. He bulked up this year so he can be better in the blocking department. He excelled at that. 2 years ago, he was Jimmy Graham light. Now you add a guy that can block and catch, makes him a tougher version of Jimmy Graham. And if Rob Gronkowski can stay healthy, now they have that two tight end set that made them even more dangerous a couple seasons ago when they had Aaron Hernandez. So I'm going with Austin Seferian-Jenkins out of Washington for the New England Patriots. At number 30, we have the San Francisco 49ers, who seem to have 45 selections in this year's draft class. Not a lot of roster spots, but let's say here at pick 30, they only have 11 picks, so don't take this literally, fans out there. Where do they go at pick number 30?
Now I look around this roster and I say, it's one of the most talented rosters. They're so talented they've actually redshirted a couple of players in Tank Carradine and Marcus Lattimore. I look at one of our biggest needs and the reason that we couldn't really produce points against Seattle in the NFC Championship, wide receiver. We lost Mario Manningham. We've had some issues. I'm going to go with the guy who I have tweeted about, and I said, if anyone has the opportunity to be a Hall of Fame wide receiver in this class, it will be this guy, and that's Jarvis Landry at LSU. I like the tenacity that this kid shows, covering kicks when he was at LSU, and pound for pound, he has the best hands I've seen since Chris Carter. He catches everything that goes up. You team him with a guy like Anquan Bolden, who has that same mindset to be physical and get the job done. Colin Kaepernick will now have options along with Crabtree, Quentin Patton, and of course Vernon Davis.
Wow, Chris with a shocker at 30 with the San Francisco 49ers, but I can't blame him because Landry is an outstanding receiver. Gene, you're back on the clock now. You have the Denver Broncos at 31. Where are you going with this pick?
Well, there's a lot of places that Denver could go, but I think when you look at their offseason moves, while they lost Eric Decker, I actually think that they upgraded in athleticism at the wide receiver position. I also think that with the return of guys who were on the IR last year on the offensive line, it's really going to bolster what they do on the offensive line. And of course, DeMarcus Ware being added to that defensive line, and a healthy Von Miller is going to bring that pass rush back up to what it was 2 years ago when they had Doomerville and Von Miller. So the major thing I see is you have Champ Bailey who's gone. They brought in a guy who's been injury prone pretty much his entire career and is, let's be real about it, one step away from being suspended for a year, due to some off the field. So I think that right here is a great opportunity to go cornerback. And I'm going to shock some people or surprise some people with my pick, but I'm going to go cornerback Pierre Desir out of Lindenwood University.
Wow, Pierre Desir, I like him a lot. I graded him out as a second-round prospect. You have him going to Denver at 31. Why Pierre Desir over other cornerback prospects in his draft class?
Well, I think that you look at a lot of those cornerbacks and you say, okay, what do they do well? I'm trying to project a cornerback into a position where he can have the most success. Here's what I know about Pierre Desir. He is a ball hawk. He is going to get to the ball, and when he gets there, he's actually going to intercept the ball. He's got great ball skills. He's got length to be able to deal with those taller, bigger wide receivers that are in the NFL. He has athleticism to burn, 11-foot broad jump, which means that when he changes direction, he's exploding out of his brakes. Those are the things that make the difference between a tip ball and an interception that's going to the house. I think that I have no clue why Pierre Desir ended up at Lindenwood University, but if I'm Denver, I'm happy because now I get to get him at 31.
You can't ignore 20-plus interceptions in your career, and he's also an outstanding kickoff returner. It says a lot about his ability once he gets the football in his hands. And that puts me on the clock at number 32 with the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. And I think their defense is set. They're fine defensively. They have to continue to add talent around Russell Wilson. And last year, the right side of their offensive line was atrocious. I know they re-signed J.R. Sweezy. He's there at guard. And I think they have to get better at right tackle. So I'm going with Morgan Moses out of Virginia. I liked what I saw out of Moses at the Senior Bowl throughout the course of his career. Here's a guy that played both left tackle and right tackle. I think he'd be a fixture on the right side, giving Seattle two excellent bookends, and Russell Okung and Morgan Moses helping that running game, helping the passing game, and now front side pressure won't be a problem for Russell Wilson. So I'm helping that offensive line by going with Morgan Moses out of Virginia. All right, Chris, we're moving into the second round. Only two teams that didn't have first round selections, Washington and the Indianapolis Colts. You have the Redskins pick at pick 34. Where do they go with their first pick in this year's draft?
Now, this happens in every draft, and it's okay, and the Redskins actually benefit from this happening. Teams need to fill needs across the board. Houston has a pick before me. I don't think they're going to pick this guy. I think they'll probably go quarterback since they took Clowney. Louis Nix had an early first-round grade by me. He instantly upgrades my front. Helps out my back end as well by being able to cause pressure from the nose position and allows them to actually flow up the field and the pass rushers to do their job. Last year, Washington struggled with trying to stop the run. Even though they have some talented guys, Louis Nix will be an instant upgrade to that front.
And when you look at a guy like Louis Nix, you look at your ideal nose tackle. He can also play the shade as well. What makes him that ideal defensive tackle in a 3-4 defense or even a 4-3 defense?
Everyone refers to size, but I don't think that is one of the things that is his biggest tool. It's the fact that he can take on a double team. He understands how to pressure and also make the center's job more difficult than it should be. Some guys don't know how to do that. He's one of those talented guys who does.
All right, Gene. Chris went with Louis Nix for the Redskins in there for their second-round pick. You have the Colts in the second round. They don't have a first-round pick due to the fact that they traded for Trent Richardson, who should see a lot of carries this year in that offense. How can they help both Andrew Luck and the rest of that team with this pick in the second round?
Well, some people will question when you, as a coach, a head coach or a coordinator, begin to go to the well of a college team that you coach for. But I think in this particular case and at this position in the draft, because they're so far down in the second round, I think they need to target another blocker for Andrew Luck. If that's your golden boy, you got to keep him upright. And let's be honest, he took a lot of hits last year. He had to do a lot more running than he necessarily wanted to. And I think they will look to bolster that offensive line with someone who can come in and either start immediately or be that sixth guy, that sixth man that you can put at multiple positions on the offensive line. For that reason, I think they're going to look to Stanford and go with guard David Yankee.
That's a shocker right there, and this is the second round, so I actually think that's a good fit. I actually graded him out as a first-round prospect. And why do you think a lot of people aren't as high on Yankee as they should be, as opposed to, guys wanting other players at that guard position? I think he's a good player. What do you think about David Yankee as a football player?
Well, I think that when you look at the draft, when you look at the draftable people, there are a lot of guys who are tackle guards, and we're not sure whether or not NFL franchises are valuing them as a tackle or whether they're valuing them as a guard. Zack Martin's a guy who originally, when people started putting their rankings together, was ranked as a guard. As evaluations began going on, all of a sudden people said, wait a minute, this guy has tackle ability. I think that when you look at that, everyone's become enamored with that tackle position, the left tackle, the right tackle position, and making sure that they bolster that. And that's why you've seen so many tackles be taken in the first round. I think you'll see people continue to jump to get tackles. I think Cyrus Kwanjo will be a guy that's gone pretty early in the second round, if not make it into the first round of a draft. And so when you look at where Indianapolis is that David Yankee, hey, is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Can he play center? I know this. Stanford plays NFL-style ball. He's an offensive lineman coming from an NFL-style program, and his former offensive coordinator just happens to be over at Indianapolis. I believe is a perfect fit for what they want to do. He may not be a perfect fit for every team.
And that makes sense because you go into a guy that actually coached you in college, knows your strengths, knows your weaknesses, knows where you best fit, and he's a movement guard, and I think that helps out a lot for Trent Richardson on those power plays and getting him more room to run the football. All right, let's recap our 2014 football game plan staff mock draft. Some great selections here, top to bottom. Bridgewater was the first quarterback off the board. We had 3 quarterbacks going in round 1 in Bridgewater, Manziel, and Carr. We had a guy like Lamarcus Joyner, a Swiss Army knife defensive back, going to Cincinnati. Ebron fell down to San Diego, still a great pick. We had Pierre Desir, a Division II player, going in round 1. So overall, we had 14 defensive players, 18 offensive players, all 32 picks. Even in the second round, David Yankee and Louis Nix were outstanding selections. So we know the fans out there will think this is wrong. We're all going to be wrong come Wednesday or Thursday night. So we just love your feedback. Hit us up with your comments and thoughts on our mock draft at FBall Game Plan. You can follow Gene at Gene Clemens, Chris at CJ Florida 9, and we look forward to talking to you guys after the draft with our draft grades and our draft thoughts.